Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the latest edition of the FIFA World Cup Speaker Series from the American Center Moscow. I'm Joshua Ping. With me today is Matt Laczkowski. Matt is legal counsel for Fortress GB, a leader in technology solutions tailored for the sports and entertainment industry. From 2021 to 25, Matt was the director of sporting administration at St. Louis City SC of the MLS, Major League Soccer. Previously, he was director of athlete and talent representation at Tandem Sports and Entertainment. He's also taught intercollegiate athletics management as an adjunct professor at St. Louis University and is the co-founder of University, a platform connecting college athletes to opportunities for coaching, instruction, and mentoring. Now, we are just a few weeks away from the start of the FIFA World Cup, and the U.S. is preparing to host the largest global soccer tournament ever. It's an opportunity to grow soccer in the U.S. from the grassroots, at the collegiate level, at the pro level, and Matt brings a wealth of expertise on the professional soccer pipeline in the U.S. and the landscape of soccer recruiting. So our conversation will be on that tonight. Matt, welcome to the American Center Moscow. Thanks for joining us today.
Appreciate y'all having me. Thanks.
All right. Well, Matt, just from the top, what does your current role at Fortress GB entail? What projects have you been working on lately?
Yeah, drinking from the hose, learning some new stuff. So as you said, came from the athlete representation and the team kind of sporting side, and now on I guess I'm a proper lawyer now. But using that kind of more on the contract negotiating side, et cetera. So yeah, Fortress's clients, Fortress kind of born from security a couple of decades ago. Forefather of digital ticketing technologies, things like that, credentialing, and so yeah, learning my way around data privacy and things like that. But really, kind of talking to similar people, similar actors, the general counsels and things like that, but from the other side, really trying to help, get to the finish line on some solutions that are geared around really, events like this and World Cup being a client and things like that, but just setting up and being ready for what's about to go down in a couple of weeks here.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an office with quite a lot of global reach and exactly like you said, a lot of relevance to what's going on in the U.S. in just a few weeks. You came to Fortress GB following your time in the MLS. What's your background in soccer and what's your background in pro soccer?
In real life, I'm 6'9", so not much of a soccer player. I think I quit playing soccer at about 12 because I was in a small town in the U.S. where soccer was kind of the other sport, and I was stuck in goal and not really learning how to play with my feet, so I kind of stepped away from it. But I guess fast forward, so I kind of got into soccer professionally by way of a relationship that was born from my agent days. A basketball agent met a soccer agent who happened to be, unbeknownst to me, kind of one of the godfathers of soccer in the United States, professional soccer in the United States. Introduced me, he represented some folks, including my now former boss who was at St. Louis. And so, I joined, I guess people call it a project. I joined, what was a startup, what was an idea. I think I was employee 20 couple. We built the first team, built the second team, rebuilt them all. But really, learned, that was the second CBA I learned, right? Learned the NBA CBA, and, kind of from there, part of why I guess I was attractive to them in the role was I had spent time, placing basketball players, internationally, and so understood kind of the conversations with agents and teams, and, learned the hard way sometimes with some of the nuances of global soccer player movement, solidarity training comp, things like that. But really, I can't claim to be, and I won't claim to be an expert on talent evaluation in the soccer space. I think that's a nuance. People spend entire careers, right? Like I think I could talent scout basketball. I don't think I could talent scout soccer. And so I really was brought in, to paper to help, as people were getting around to business terms, knowing knowing the MLS's roster construction rules and their CBA, and then trying to make sure that as we were building a roster, making sure people slotted in the right places, and we were doing it, in a way that hopefully was in everyone's best interest or aligned.
That sounds, very involved, especially with St. Louis being a new franchise at that point. What, just from the start of that franchise, what do you think brought soccer to St. Louis? How is St. Louis as a soccer city?
Yeah, so not from St. Louis, moved here. I'm sitting in St. Louis right now, but moved here for that job. And again, a lot of what I do, I look at a lot of it through the lens of basketball, right? That's what I knew first, and kind of the different places and the hotbeds for basketball. But St. Louis deserved a team because they have a very, very rich, probably one of the richest soccer traditions in the United States. I'll get the story wrong, but there was, I think in the 50s, a team from the U.S. scored on, I want to say it was England or Italy, and there were three or four guys from St. Louis on that squad, from the same neighborhood in St. Louis. And St. Louis has had, I think, the number of kids who have come up, the people who have played for the U.S. men's and women's national teams from St. Louis outpaces, I think, anywhere else in the country. And they just, a fan base that was, that I know, you're familiar, right? But U.S. sports fans kind of operate and move differently than sports fans in other parts of the world, right? And it's kind of, in some places, the game is an afterthought. And what's been interesting about soccer is that, because I kind of tell people I love there's no timeouts, right? But that also creates the game being what you're there to see. And so, to be involved, having traveled for basketball and watching the way people engage as fans in basketball, with basketball in Europe is different than the way they engage with basketball in the States, right? People kind of talk about the Miami Heat as an example, but, people kind of get the games late and they're, looking to see who else is there, and they're enjoying food and they're up on the concourse. But with soccer, it's soccer for soccer's sake. And to watch the way the fans in St. Louis, who had a tradition, had a history, embraced the team and the game. And, look, the team fell on hard times and, weren't putting a winning product on the field despite best efforts, right? And the fans still come out and support, and it's still a great place. I haven't been to a game this year, but, it's still a great place, great atmosphere, great fans who hopefully, no team prepares to lose, right? Like, every team goes out and wants to win. But, the fans here continue to show up and support, and, hopefully we'll be rewarded with the fact that they just are a super tradition-rich, soccer hotbed here in the U.S.
That's amazing. I didn't know about that history of St. Louis and soccer. Hopefully, as all eyes are on these different host cities in the U.S., all these different traditions start getting a little more attention. It's not just a niche thing, but something that can really be shown off on the global stage. You shared a little bit about your basketball background. Would love to learn a little bit more about how you got to play college basketball. Just a bit about your background there.
I was tall. No, I'm a Division III athlete at best. I started off at a small D3 school, left there after 2 years and walked on at UNC, and hardest fun I've ever had. I tell people that if they lined up Michael Jordan to the worst guy who ever came through there, I'd probably be either at the other end or maybe standing next to the guy at the other end. But it was, I grew up, I was on an airplane until I was in college, right? Like, didn't really know what steak was till I was in college. Steak was that thin growing up. And then, got to go to Hawaii in the Final Four, and but learned lessons that I still carry with me to this day. UNC basketball is a special place. The Carolina way is a very real way of approaching things that are bigger than basketball, but using basketball as the vehicle. And I knew I was never going to get paid to play, but I wanted to work, kind of at the intersection of basketball and business and sports and law. And so I, back when people had paper resumes, I carried printed copies of my resume in my book bag to practice, knowing that agents and GMs and things like that were going to come through and, recruit my teammates. I used to tell people, whatever that was, 25, 30 years ago, I wanted to be Pat Riley or Mitch Kupchak and, run an NBA team by the ocean. That evolved into, some internships in law school and being on the sidelines. And, I've had friends who were much more successful than me tell me they used to be kind of envious of the way that I would keep trying, even though I was told no. And right, like, I think you mentioned there's some young people potentially in this audience. And like, I'm very aware that there's not many lessons I have standing to give people, but one I'll tell people is just like, right? The surefire way to fail is to quit. And so, you just got to keep working at, trying to get your foot in the door. And then when you get in the door, like, be the first one in and the last to leave.
I think that's great advice. And just like you said, for anyone in the audience who has questions that they want to bring to Matt, feel free to send them in the chat. We'll go through them later, and sure to get a lot of insight from you. It sounds like even just from D3 college basketball, you got to sort of get this global perspective, having grown up in a small town, and sport really opened up a lot of doors for you. It sounds like that's been what you've done for a lot of people in soccer, maybe with placing people internationally. Can you tell us a bit about just what that process even looks like, what placing people for soccer at different parts of the world takes?
Well, I can tell you about basketball. I can tell you, again, I was on the other side of it for soccer with, in St. Louis, but the agent days were all basketball based. But yeah, it's a challenge. And it's, look, at the end of the day, the theme for I'm sure for most, I don't know, kind of the other topics you've had, but in terms of, if you want to call it recruitment or representation or, whatever, it's relationship driven. It's, regardless of which side of the table you're on, you're doing business with people that you know their reputation, hopefully you have a relationship, and a lot of times the placement, is built on those relationships where you've already done some work. People know they can trust that you're, especially if you're representing a player, like, they need to know that you're not selling them a lie, or, someone who's injured, or someone who's not what you say they are. And, at the end of the day, you've also, nobody, no player wants to admit that they're not kind of at a certain level, right? And so there's a dance to be done on the placement side, on the recruitment placement side, that you've got to be hopefully fortunate to have a player who's also kind of self-aware and understands, right? Like when I was doing the NBA stuff, nobody wanted to not be in the NBA. Like every college kid wanted to be in the NBA. And kind of the parallel, again, I see it through the basketball lens, but as it relates to soccer on the other side. So the MLS is kind of, right, when I was working with guys trying to be in the NBA, those who just missed and went to Europe, they were like, oh, I'll go to Europe for a year and I'll come back and I'll be in the NBA. And they just thought they would go over to Europe or, China or wherever it was and kill. And just, they just show up and be better than everybody. And that wasn't the case. Like, there is great basketball being played all over the world. And just like, what I saw with soccer is we had, right, there is a very big international, to the MLS's credit, big international influence and presence in the MLS amongst the players, amongst the sporting staffs, things like that. But I think, one of the things I saw, and this isn't meant to be negative towards anybody, but I saw the flip of it, where players would come to the MLS thinking they would just show up, be the best player on the field, go through some motions, increase their stock, right? Player movement in soccer is different than player movement in basketball. Yeah. But, the reality is when you throw out a ball and, put up a scoreboard, everybody wants to win. And so, no matter what level you're, like, there's probably a reason you weren't quite in the NBA. There's probably, a lot of people don't want to look in the mirror, but at some point the advice is play better, right? But kind of to the core of your question, I don't want to look past that. Like, one thing you've got to be very cognizant of internationally is the potential fit for the player in the place. Right? Like, we had some kids that just came from small places, didn't have big comfort zones. Sending them to Istanbul might not have been in their best interest, right? Like, some of them may have been more comfortable if they could be in Spain or Italy or something like that. The interesting one, having seen it again on the flip side in soccer on the team side, is players have a built-in network of friends and relationships, whereas, like, if they come with a wife and they don't speak the language, the wives end up on an island, and it becomes hard for the player to succeed just because life is hard. Right. Like, I just saw this morning a guy that we represented at our agency just announced his retirement this morning. 16 years, 22 teams. And he was the best I'd ever seen at embracing living internationally and what basketball afforded him from a lifestyle and experience perspective, what he saw globally. And unfortunately, athletes sometimes, though they're larger than life, they're still kids. And, one of the recipes for failure as well was guys that would go to another country and essentially, go to practice, come home, sit in their apartment, hop on the gaming console, and just count down the days till the end of the season. The ones who found success were the ones who embraced their community and became embraced by the community, and kind of might have gotten re-signed. A lot of these unfortunately are kind of 1-year deals, make goods, things like that. But really, a lot of it is what you make of it as a player. Yes, you have to play well, but if you embrace the community and the people, they'll embrace you right back.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot of relationship work, especially if you're, in a new stop or 2 new stops every year. I wonder, how do you talk to somebody? Going beyond soccer, just sport as a whole, how do you just talk to somebody in that position who maybe doesn't want to adapt to the situation they're in? And on top of that, what about this current landscape of like name, image, likeness money? How does that impact your what your job would have been to talk to these people and give them the lowdown?
I don't even want to pretend to know. I think I have a sense, but I don't want to I don't want to be negative about any of it, but I think it's made everyone's jobs harder. Now look, I saw the kid, one of the kids who was drafted in the NFL, right? Like they basically said the NIL money has changed the way he's approaching his financial future, which is great, right? In terms of he's not touching any of his NFL money because he's already been, made plenty of money through the NIL stuff. I think unfortunately, kind of universally, painting with a real broad brush, but unfortunately, to have such meaningful conversations or impacting conversations now being shifted to younger and younger kids, right? Like, so conversations that used to be had with a 21-year-old and his parents were then being had with a 18-year-old and his parents are now being had with 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds and their parents. And those folks aren't equipped yet to make the right business, and unfortunately, a lot of the agent business, there are great people in the business. There are also bad people, like any business, right? But a lot of times there's a fear tactic, or just kind of telling people what they don't know as a way of showing, not ever giving them the power to know or to learn. And unfortunately, the other byproduct, we just having this conversation about an hour ago, college basketball, football are now kind of where the NBA and the NFL were in the 80s and 90s in terms of guys making really good money, but not life-changing, never have to work again money, but they're spending it and then recycling and then, not really embracing the fact that there's any kind of an education. They're as I heard the other day, the NCAA really hasn't enforced, academic standards in 3 years. And that's sad when it's, literally the they are, I know it's a made up word, student athlete, but they are students and athletes theoretically. But no, look, it's the last, whether you're on the recruiting side or, the representation side or the team side, you're fortunate when you either get to represent and or have a player on your team who looks at the person in the mirror and holds them accountable first. For better or worse, there are a lot of athletes who will point at, an agent, a coach, whoever, and kind of say, well, like, it's your fault that I'm not succeeding. And right, two things can be true at the same time, but a lot of times there are players who don't really want to take that accountability first. And, you're fortunate, probably repeating myself, but you're fortunate when you get to work with somebody who they know you're in their corner. They know they can trust you. They know you're honest. They know you have that you are advocating for them, but they also know that they have to hold up their end of the bargain too.
Sure.
And I think, just the other part with the NIL, is right. Like I was just talking to somebody the other day, the number of kids that use like I and me instead of us and we, and also talk about like what the team can give them as opposed to what they can provide to the team or can kind of add to the team, seems to be a pretty good telltale sign of like a recipe for what may not be success. And right, like, not to be cliche, but I'm probably going to say this to the wrong audience, right? But the quote from the movie Miracle, where they finally figure out that it's like what's on the, the name on the front is more important than the name on the back. And right. I think that NIL is really eroding away at any sense of that anymore, just because it's happening so much younger. Again, imagine being 14, 15 years old and getting $1 million, and now in the college space, being able to get it without having actually, like the kids that apparently every kid in the portal this year for basketball was asking for $1 million. after averaging 3 points, and it's crazy.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, do you see university soccer ever getting to like a fraction of that sort of market?
Well, I think I just saw last week that I know it's been rumored to be on the horizon, but that there may be a proposal actually being kind of batted around to make college soccer kind of a 2 semester thing that like may or may not break away from the NCAA. Like I know it's like the Big Ten and the ACC were rumored, but
Wow.
essentially to spread it out and kind of make it more semi-professional, pipeline-ish. I think a few years, or what was it, last fall, the NCAA kind of took Canadian hockey, where it's semi-professional, and allowed for, right, like kind of what had happened in basketball for years, where like if you could show that it was just a minimal amount of kind of cost of living, that wouldn't uh, invalidate your potential to be eligible to play collegiate sports. And one of the conversations that was going on when I was on the soccer side was that, some version of, whether it's MLS Next Pro, USL, whatever, but I think that there would be a similar threshold. I don't know what that number would be, round numbers, 35, 50 grand, whatever it is. But like if a kid made less than that annually from playing soccer, it wouldn't invalidate their eligibility. They may still be able to play professionally, because I think that is part of, right, like soccer is figuring out as they go. And so, in some instances, being later to the game is better because you get to learn from others' mistakes. But there are, again, like no kid wants to admit that they may not be, good enough to change their lives through the sport. But, specific to the MLS, like some of the contract structures, treating kids like commodities and tying them into 5-year deals, is good in some instances because there's certainty, but there's also a downside to it, in that, if a kid's going to make something less than what it would cost him to go back to college later, there's a real opportunity cost that, a 17-year-old may not be, a 15-year-old may not be self-aware enough, or kind of thinking globally enough or long-term enough to really make the right choice.
Sure. Now, when you were at St. Louis SC, how did you talk to people who, were looking for, as you mentioned, maybe just a stepping stone to the next place? And how did you also navigate the people who were looking for that stability? St. Louis might not be like the most well-known global soccer destination. I mean, it's growing, as you mentioned. How do you talk to those different people that you were trying to bring into that city?
Now, even more interesting is if you Google St. Louis, apparently it says it's the most dangerous city in the country. And it comes, and it's not to get nuanced or sidetracked, but I grew up in Baltimore, which they're kind of sister cities in certain ways, especially relative to kind of crime and things. But like in Baltimore, I'm gonna get this backwards, but in one of the places they bifurcate the statistics between county and city, and the other one they combine them. And I think it's St. Louis, they bifurcate them. So St. Louis looks way more dangerous, but it's because they don't allow for kind of the county statistics to take away from some of just the high end crime statistics in the city. So one of the first conversations you really have to have is like selling people on them coming here, or coming to the city, right? Like the recruitment for a team is different than recruitment as an agent, but recruitment from a team involves not just style of play and teammates and plan and philosophy and where you are on the table and the amount of money, and but it's also very much like, what's it going to be like to live there. And we were fortunate that we had some great players who were great people first and foremost, but they came from some pretty low key, we had a lot of Scandinavian influence, and just some peaceful places. And selling, we'd get them on a Zoom, and their wives would say, hey, like, I just Googled this and it says it's dangerous there. I don't want to bring my 2 and 3-year-old kids to that city. And so you've got to, again, be honest with people, but you kind of got to get them here. You got to fly them in and, drive them around and show them what life can be like and will be like. And, every city's got its downsides. But, whether they are coming for a year or two, or like, you really, guy who's been the goalie at St. Louis since we started, he's here, he signed a new deal. Part of the appeal for both sides was he had a career and, kind of fallen out of favor where he was, or, the younger guy came up and he really wanted to be part of something here. I say here, but in St. Louis for the long term, right? And you like that when somebody says, yes, I'd love to come be part of this thing. Now, again, it's kind of hard if they're performing on that. That guy's a world beater. But if you get somebody who wants to be part of your system, your place as a home, but they're not performing and it's not good for either side, that's almost a harder conversation. But yeah, kind of, again, the parallel by distinction of difference, right, on the NCAA right now is like, it used to be you recruited a kid for 4 years and beyond 4 years to 40 years or whatever. And now it's a straight kind of 1 year, 6-month transaction. And, unfortunately, I don't know how many people in this audience love sports, but part of what makes sports great is when you have somebody who's been part of your place that is kind of the face of a franchise or, whatever. And it's making that harder. But in terms of recruitment to a team, the place they'll be living is kind of equally important.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up around Chicago, live in DC now. I mean, the reputation of any city really can be. You hear so many crazy things online, but when you actually spend the time there, it's very different. And like what you were saying with those people who actually stay for a while. I mean, in DC, like Alex Ovechkin is just not like synonymous with hockey in this region, and you just see so many of those long-term benefits of just one person staying. I mean, the youth clinics, even the women's hockey here, just those long-term growths out of a single person's commitment to an area. I mean, hopefully we see that with soccer in the U.S., especially with as many eyes as are going to be on U.S. soccer in the coming weeks. Now, with the World Cup coming up, I wanted to ask, if you were still at St. Louis SC, how would this tournament be affecting your role, I guess, before the tournament, during, and after?
Again, something I'm probably not, I don't want to, I'll answer it more kind of relative to MLS teams than just the St. Louis, because I think, again, I'd probably be too skewed based on like where we were, structurally, turnover, things like that.
Sure.
But I think it's, unfortunately, I don't say I wish, because I'm nobody. I'm not even in MLS anymore. But like, it would have been great if the MLS could have aligned the flipping of their calendar to coincide with the World Cup and to start anew on the heels of the World Cup this year, as opposed to kind of awkwardly doing it a year from now. But I think it's, some teams probably used this kind of pre-World Cup period as an extended training camp, trying to figure out rosters. I think some will probably use the end, the kind of post-World Cup second half of this season similarly. I think some places will probably use it as a way to really evaluate or reorient their rosters somewhat entirely. I think, only half jokingly, but for some people, like, they'll get a very well-earned couple weeks off. Like I hadn't, people think I'm crazy. I haven't taken a week vacation since I was 14 and my parents took me on one. Right. And so, right, when you work on either side, representation side, team side, first question people ask you, right, is like, oh, what's your season? And the answer is, well, I work in the off season is the busy time. And so it's 365. And so the one thing I probably wish I would have still been there for is like the 2-week vacation I never took. Because I've got some friends who are, still there, who are literally going to travel the globe for a week or two and just, recuperate and recover and relax. But I think there's some version where those two things, the recruiting, the other part of it is, the MLS, again, facing that uphill battle in some ways for talent based on, cap structures and things like that. There's the scouts will have plenty of talent here to watch domestically that they'd otherwise have to travel to go see. And so I got to imagine, right, it's almost like AAU for soccer has come to the States. And, some of those folks will be able to just, hop in a car or hop on a 2-hour flight as opposed to a 14-hour flight, whatever it might be. And I hate to say this, but like also get eyes on people. Like it's kind of funny to me on the recruiting side. People will bring a player in who they've been told is 6'4", and the guy shows up and he's 6'1", and they're like, oh, I swear, and so you actually get to kind of see people and literally look them in the eye. But I think it will be interesting to see, right? Like St. Louis is an interesting market. A lot of the MLS teams that are not hosting are still trying to ride the momentum. Summers of soccer and things like that. And it will be interesting to see, right? The name we haven't even mentioned, Messi, and kind of like what is the MLS actually going to be able to leverage to have a different product post World Cup. I think the flip in the schedule is a good start, right? Like the USL here is adding a third tier, like a top tier, and going to try to do promotion and relegation. Still TBD exactly how, but like it'll be nice to have competition to see who can put the best product in place, right? As a guy who dealt with player contracts, the MLS could benefit from simplifying, stripping away some of its, I don't say unnecessary, but like overthought rules relative to what constitutes a salary and things like that. But just, at some point they probably have to, or they need to raise their salary cap number to really get in the right kind of talent, global talent, and then probably figure out a way to reorient the treatment and rewarding of domestic players and kind of valuing of domestic players. But look, it's, again, I wish I could tell you I had played soccer through college. There are folks there that have played their entire lives who are far more familiar, intimate, invested in the pipeline. And you're right. Like I grew up in a place where soccer and football, American football, were the same season, and all of the 6'3" quasi athletes went out and played receiver in football. Where if soccer would have been in the spring, they might have also played soccer and been really good soccer players. It's right. We live in the States where, lacrosse, I don't even know if folks on this, in the audience know what lacrosse is, right? But like lacrosse is quote unquote the fastest growing sport since I was 10 years old, and it's still a niche sport. So I think soccer is getting there. It's just also, again, let's look at it backwards through basketball. Like European, the Dream Team went to, Dream Team was what, 92, right? And like, it's now 30 some years later, we're seeing the influx of European talent that was seeded by what they watched the Dream Team do in the Olympics. And so, maybe we're doing, I think one of your potential questions was about like World Cup 94 to now, right? And like, maybe this will be the version where people, there are, maybe that seeded the MLS, which has now been around long enough with the academy. Maybe there are plenty of kids in the academy system or just shy of the age for the academy system that will, despite the fact that it seems like the ticketing conversation has kind of cost prohibitions against kids getting into games, but like, maybe it being, right, like who's the, is it Luca? Luca used to talk about like watching the NBA at 3 or 4 in the morning. Maybe some of these young kids will get to watch games in prime time over the next 3 weeks that will, inspire them to keep going on the journey of a pathway to, improving at soccer where they might have otherwise picked up a baseball glove or a basketball or whatever. And again, there's a lot of interesting conversations going on around the MLS about the MLS, right? Like maybe pairing with League MX and things like that. But it's a really fun, like for somebody, right? Like we're sitting here in the States where high scoring 500-foot home runs, 70-yard touchdown passes are kind of what get people out of their seats. And so philosophically watching something end in a 0-0 draw, right? Like the intro press conference for Ted Lasso is ageless, right? Where it's like win or lose, and they say or draw, and you're like, oh, or draw, but it's, if you get people standing and cheering and doing that and singing, like it's 90 minutes flies by, and that's kind of what's fun about it.
Yeah. Do you think you touched on it briefly, but this ticketing stuff and just accessibility, what are some trends you're viewing or trends you're observing as we head into this World Cup that you think could help or hinder that sort of audience growth?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm an outsider, right? Like I'm just reading stuff from ESPN, and other, outlets like that. But if you're telling me it's $150 round trip subway ticket, to get to a game, that's not for the masses, right? It's literally called mass transit. If you're telling me it's $2,000 a ticket for a first round, second round, round robin game, I can tell you as a kid, like, oh shit, even now, like I wouldn't be there. I won't be there. So those things seem, they seem greedy, right? And I you know I don't know cost, logistics, things like that, but that just seems like somebody's interested other than growing the game. Now, again, the crazy part is if people pay it, who are we to question it? But in terms of just getting young people in seats who are going to maybe be the future of it, that, now again, maybe there are viewing parties, maybe that's places, I'm sitting in St. Louis, I'm sure they're going to have viewing parties, and maybe just being able to have a viewing party in a place with a big screen and having kids run around does the same thing. But in terms of, I'm going to be real curious as somebody who works adjacent to the business to see, right, there have been a couple of articles that have said, like, is this going to become more of a hassle than it's worth? Will people just opt out of attending? Like, it's going to be real interesting to watch, when Apple airs MLS games, like it's a real tight, screen on the players. It'd be interesting to see if they show the venues, like, and if some of the venues are empty, like what that looks like or what that does, or if they adjust the pricing down, for subsequent games. Or like, do people go hang out in the courtyard outside, hoping that if it is fluctuating prices, kind of like old school scalping, though it's digital now, like could they get in for a fraction, once the game starts?
Gotcha. Now, whether or not stadiums are full, hotels sell out, people take that $150 subway ticket. I think a lot of teams around the MLS or even college programs or whoever, they're thinking about ways that they can leverage this tournament to grow themselves. Obviously, there's a lot to juggle. They don't control FIFA. Obviously, they don't control how people react to the games or the presentation. But how are teams in the MLS or otherwise sort of positioning themselves to capitalize on the eyeballs, both from fans and also from potential players?
Yeah, I mean, again, I've got to be careful. I can't say I know as of yesterday, right? As of, when it was announced and the couple years I was there, like there was there will be viewing parties. There will be ways of trying to associate their logo with the thing they're not even participating in, right? Just like, hosting things in support of. And then, again, I think it's the relationship piece, the agents that will be kind of made to be here because their clients are playing, and fans from other places visiting. It won't be literally foreign is the right word. It won't be a foreign place to try to sell. People like, oh, you were here, you've seen this. I think the interesting part I've actually heard, and again, the things you don't think about, right? Like, apparently, I think England plays in Dallas and in Boston, right? And so their fans were getting hotels in downtown Boston and downtown Dallas, and then finding out that the games were in Foxborough and Arlington, or Arlington Tech, whatever. And they're like, all right, we'll just take the tube, we'll take the metro. I'm like, no, there's no train, and so it's people are realizing that they've either and they drive literally on the wrong side of the road. They're not going to get rental cars, and so it's in the hotels by Dallas Stadium are now thousands of dollars a night.
Yeah, definitely hear you. You actually brought up a point early on in that answer about getting agents, like how agents are going to be treated and how they're going to view the games here. I wonder if you can speak just even with your basketball history included. How much say does an agent have over convincing a player or sort of directing a player to one team or another, a venue or another? When agents are coming to the U.S. to see their players, or agents in the U.S. are looking at new talent, what is being directed at them and how is that being communicated?
So I think there were possibly two questions mixed in at the end there, but the reality is, right, like, it kind of depends who you're working with, right? Like, I mean, Rich Paul, is who he is because he represented LeBron, right? And LeBron, again, I'll use the basketball lens, but LeBron can dictate, right? And, there are certain players in global soccer that are the same way. I think part of it is the difference in the two, right? In basketball, there's 5 players, right? One player can kind of make a team. In soccer, there's 11. And, even the greatest player needs the other guys to help out. But yeah, you can make it clear, but that your player may not prefer that destination. You can, but at the same time, say why, but why, right? Like you never want to burn a bridge because,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right? I was in the NBA side, like we maintain relationships with every team because if you burn a bridge and then, unfairly rippled on the next player who wasn't the guilty party, like you don't want to have 27 teams you can talk to as opposed to all of them. And, like if you're going to have longevity in the business and do your job well, right, again, your job is to represent the best interest of a player. So, you can't let your ego or any, you really can't have one. But the short answer is, right, there are agents of certain sway because of their rosters, because of their, who they represent, that have a certain amount of leverage. But at the end of the day, what's your why on using that leverage? Like, whose interest are you serving? Because at the end of the day, you want to present every client with the best situation for them on field, off field, again, depending on where they are in their career, right? Like the MLS kind of for a while was referred to as the retirement league because they were overpaying kind of, players who would otherwise be done with their career to get them, here to draw people. And there's some version of that that's not a sustainable strategy either because it's not a great product. But no, you for better or worse, an agent can dictate a little bit, by the information they share and don't share. But it's also like, what's the why on not sharing? Like, like I'm big on trust and big on relationships. You're only as good as your word. And, I think it was, you're in DC, right? And like the Ravens had that trade with the 49ers a couple months back that like, I don't follow enough, but like, if it's true that, there was some kind of going back on a word, that person, will never be able to get a deal done because nobody will trust them again.
Sure.
You hope that people stand up to what they say. And if they've shaken hands, like it's, the deal's the deal.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great lesson to take to any point of life outside of sports. So I guess, in your opinion, after this World Cup concludes, what do you think would be a successful outcome, especially for soccer in the U.S. for kids, for youth? And what would it take for us to translate whatever happens in this tournament into more growth?
I think the hope would be that it's already there. Like, again, like we go back, like maybe 94 was kind of like where that question was born. Yeah. And you hope that now, like the flywheel or whatever it is, has already started enough that like we don't realize like how close we are to it actually being I don't say what it can be, like to like, do this. It's also okay if the MLS is never a top 3 league in the world, right? Like, that just means somebody else has to get, fall down. And maybe we don't need that, right? Like maybe Spain and the EPL and France and Italy can continue to flourish and be what they are, and we can grow too, right? And I think, I would like to think that the hope is, and again, I see the parallel in college sports, there's just too many people involved that are self-interested and driving their own agendas, right? And, you asked the question well in terms of like the best interest of the sport and the future of the sport and the kids and the participation. And so I think the hope would be that some of the people, even in the MLS, there's some older owners, not by age, but just how long they've been involved, that helped the league stand up when it needed to be stood up, who don't want to make the same investment as some of the new owners. And again, it comes down to, I think Net Gains was the book that was basically soccer's version of Moneyball. And the end of every chapter basically came down to, you've got to spend to win. And, I'll say it's unfortunate, but like those involved who you can't game the game, you can't, sometimes the fewer rules you have, the more it allows for the freedom of I understand that there's a want for parity, in soccer and things like that. And, there's a version where the business model has been about expansion and that can't keep up. But, you've got to, you don't have to. The hope would be that like the games are fun, that people who may not typically watch it and enjoy it. Again, like I got to look no further than the mirror when I tell you how much fun it is to not have timeouts. In basketball, there was a guy when they brought the TBT around a few years ago, and they, I guess invented is the right word, but created the Elam ending, right? Where instead of a clock. It was like, hey, once we get to a certain point, whoever scores the next 8 points, like here's the target score, right? And so it changed the end of basketball games. And so I just think that, you know, it seems like the NFL has been on the cusp of dying for forever, even though it's not, right? Like it's a violent sport, people get hurt, but it's still, every day of the year they've got something on the calendar for the NFL. I think the hope is that, again, maybe the MLS learns from that. Like, they're trying to. The MLS is a long season, and there's multiple competitions. And again, being from the outside, look, the NBA has started an in-season cup to mirror soccer. Like, there are some great things to cross over from each sport to the other. At the end of the day, like, you want to put a good product on the field, and right, like, and again, I don't have standing, but my friends who are kind of curmudgeons, who are like real critics of how they watch and what they watch, tell me that the MLS product is kind of because there's less tiki-taka, less touch, less talent. I hate using that word because they're all talented, world-class athletes, but that it's more of a blue collar, grinded out, less fun to watch, thing. But it's also, I sat next to my boss, who was our head of sporting philosophy, strategy, and all that stuff, and and our technical folks, and I couldn't tell you when formations were changing in real time and things like that. But like, the fans will need to catch up as well to see what they're watching. But I think it's just, you hope that it's fun, right? Like, and you hope that there's drama, and again, the part of me that didn't realize that there had to be 2 overtimes in soccer every time it goes to extra time, right? Like, you hope that if there is, extra time and PKs, like, it'd be kind of cool if the last game comes down to some kind of drama like that, where you're right as the thing putting it on, as the television stations and all that kind of stuff, like, you're getting all of it, you're getting all the nuances, all of the different versions it can take, and it's ending in PKs or something. Like, you got to imagine, like, there's some momentum to be ridden there. And then I think it's just, you hope that people like the MLS didn't just say, like, let's get to the World Cup and see what happens after it. You hope that the rest of 26, becomes like, hey, did you have fun with that? Here's a mini ticket package. Like, here's, did you have fun with that? Right? Like, tune in on Apple, like, and you capture people in a way that kind of the momentum is something that they're riding out, and not just saying like, again, I was on the NBA side, and we used to tell people, like, the draft isn't the end thing, the goal. The draft is the beginning. And so you kind of hope that this World Cup is kind of the beginning of maybe the next chapter for soccer in the U.S.
Well, hope we're ready for it. I mean, it reminds me a bit about some of the consternation over even this 2026 Winter Olympics. People were worried about the arenas being built on time, transportation, like how things would affect the city of Milan. And everybody was feeling, honestly, a little pessimistic before everything began. And then, things like the hockey tournaments for both the men and the women happened, all the drama around the figure skating. You just hope that a good sporting product comes out, like you said, and then grow from there. So I think we'll wrap it up with a few questions from the audience.
It looks like there's a couple in there, right?
Yeah. So back of our earlier topics, how important are college sports in developing pro players, and does it depend on the sport?
Yes, and also, again, if we're talking globally, right, like, college sports are very unique to the United States.
Right.
At least right now. Like, I've got a friend working on some stuff in India, trying to grow, so it's it's interesting because, right, there's a version where the longer a kid spends playing college sports, the NBA is very big on potential. But at what age is somebody ready? And in soccer, it seems younger and younger. In basketball, with kids being 1-year mercenaries and not really being coached up on the nuances of defense, I don't know that staying longer is equating into being more developed. And so I think really, like, the answer is, what does the development pipeline look like? And, like, development with a capital D. It's kids spend a lot, again, I look at it through basketball, kids spend a lot of time in the gym and still have broken jump shots, right? Like, it's really a function of, like, what is being invested in development in each sport. And so, My understanding is college soccer has essentially become a, I don't know, a parallel to MLS Next Pro and the USL, right? And they're heavily recruiting European kids to come in, and then the top programs are having 23 and 24-year-old domestic kids round out those rosters, and it very much is all about winning soccer and not necessarily academics or holistic development of a person. And so, right, like what is our, like if we're talking about this through the lens of professional athletics being the end goal, like if we're looking through the athlete lens, then I think it depends where you're ready, and what's going to service you best in getting ready. I think probably, IMG Academy, and things like that are an interesting one to bring up, especially for individual sport athletes, where it's like, okay, like let me go do my schooling in the evenings, or knock it out in chunks, and not going and sitting in school from 8 to 3, but getting up and doing a sport, and then maybe sitting in class for an hour and doing a sport again, and sitting, and just, again, it depends what the goal is of the if we're talking about grooming professional athletes. I mean, we can all say this out loud, like they are professional athletes in college now in certain sports.
Yeah, sure. Exactly. Thanks for that. Pivoting a bit, how'd you first get into sports law?
Yeah. Came out, and I knew when I was graduating I didn't want to just have a job, and wanted to work at the intersection of sports, business, and the law, and whether that was building a team or working with players, and just kind of knew I needed to be better equipped, and it's I also knew I never wanted to litigate or stand in a courtroom, but it's just I had to make the investment in law school. And again, I don't know in the audience kind of the different, what that means in different countries, and the time commitment and things like that. But got into a firm that wasn't doing anything related to sports. I wasn't for them, they weren't for me. Did that twice. Hung my own shingle, so started my own practice. Again, luck, timing, and perseverance just kind of kept being told no until I built out a little bit of a niche, and then found my way in by way of a guy who, the first time he met me, told me I was a good guy but not top 5 from top 5, and 8 years later introduced me as a guy who got relationships better than most, and that's kind of how I got into the everyday practice of working my way towards being an agent, and practicing law as it related to sports full time.
Sounds like the constant theme throughout all this, whether it's sports law or representing talent or whatever else, is just all these relationships that you've built, and persevering even through saying no. Okay, so I think we can maybe put these last two together. What are you personally most excited to see during the 2026 Cup? And what will it all mean for soccer in the U.S. long term?
I'm excited to see my friends who grew up and are like true, supporter, kind of rabid soccer fans. I'm excited to probably go somewhere one day, in a crowd full of them, and watch them enjoy it. Again, without having to, right? Most people have to get up at 7:30 in the morning and watch stuff here on Saturday mornings. So I'm excited for my friends that are diehard soccer fans to be able to do that either in person, or in a time where they can do it with their kids in the evening, or again, make it a Friday night, Saturday night kind of thing, and not have to again watch it. And I feel bad having said that, because the folks in the audience will have it flipped. But I think I'm just excited to watch people who care about it get to have it in their backyard.
Yeah.
And then in terms of long term, you hope you get adoption. I think you guys, you may be more familiar. I think the age range skews lower now. I think there are young fans of the MLS, of soccer. Like I don't know if the average age, but the average age, whatever, is lower. And so like that gives you longer time to, maintain those and grow those relationships and those fans. But no, I mean, again, nobody likes having a lesser product. And so, for me, I would hope that means, and it doesn't have to be either or, it doesn't have to be, international versus domestic talent, but you hope that, again, I'll use the dream team, and what that's meant for international basketball improving, and then coming back to, right, like, I mean, we're on the cusp of the NBA going to Europe in a few years. Like if the games are global, let them be global. But I think what the MLS, hopefully does and figures out in the USL is how to kind of value and reward domestic talent as well. Like there's just a skew on like really looking at their own players from the domestic pipeline as something a little bit lesser than international talent. And so I guess if there's a reality in that, like you want the domestic talent to level up and be able to be worthy of that too. Like you want to, like again, the agent in me, you want to be able to make the argument with a straight face because it's true, not because you're trying to skew statistics or analytics.
That's great. Got a couple minutes for one more. So one last one from me. You got any favorite memory from your time working in the MLS, or any favorite soccer memory you'd be able to share?
Soccer memory, right? So years and years ago, a sports writer whose name I'm blanking on, Bill Simmons, right? Like did a primer back in the day. I think before Grantland, he had a website. It was like page 2 on ESPN or whatever. Like kind of, I don't say early internet, but like earlier internet. And it was one of these like, hey, if you don't know anything about the EPL, here's each EPL team compared to like who their NBA counterpart would be. Right. And so it was like I kind of got to figure out which team I might like based on them being compared to, like I was a Spurs and a Celtics fan. And so I was like, oh, like Fulham seems like the team I might like, right? They got this smaller stadium. And so when I was in law school, the one place it was, I bartended my way through school. And so like Saturday mornings, I would get up early to kind of regroup and eat some breakfast before studying. And there was an Irish bar near me that opened up at like 7 a.m. and played EPL games. And Ian Dark was on TV, and like I just loved his accent. And so I just remember watching, and I guess it was kind of like glory days of Man U. So I remember like kind of watching Man U with Ian Dark, and that was like Giggs and those guys playing, and Yaya Toure and stuff like that. So for a non-soccer guy, that was kind of like my version of enjoying it. Was like, oh, this is kind of actually fun that it's on in the morning, and watching the world's best at it. And again, and being a basketball guy, it's amazing. This is going to sound very, very simplified, but it's amazing what guys can do with their feet.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully that replicates millions of times over coming weeks with the tournament. But now, just want to thank you, Matt, for spending some time today with us, for sharing a bit about your background, your time in the MLS, and all that has brought you to where you are today. So for our audience, tomorrow will be our next sports event. It'll be our Game Changer Speaker Series. We'll have Brian Hainline, former USTA president, on to speak about the role of tennis in making sport a public good, and also his role as the former NCAA chief medical officer. Then on June 2nd will be our next event after that. And our upcoming, or I suppose our next FIFA event will be June 22nd. So we'll be well into the tournament by then. We'll have some things to talk about from the actual pitch. So please tune into all of those if you're able. For Matt, I'm Josh. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Have a great evening.